Welcome back to Footnotes Folly and to Herodotus. I am Pemberton. This is part 2. When we left him, Croesus had just buried a son and risen again as the master of all Asia west of the river Halys. Now he turns his eyes east, toward the growing power of Cyrus the Persian, and does what anxious kings have always done: he asks the gods first. Watch him put every famous oracle in the world to a cunning test, shower the winner with a treasure that beggars belief, and receive in return an answer so beautifully two-edged it ought to carry a warning label. Let us continue.
For 2 years Croesus remained quiet in mourning, because he had been deprived of his son. But after that time Cyrus son of Cambyses overthrew the rule of Astyages son of Cyaxares, and the power of the Persians began to grow. This caused Croesus to stop mourning and to turn his attention to cutting short the power of the Persians, if he could possibly do so, while it was still growing and before they had become great. Having formed this plan, he immediately began to test the oracles, both those of the Hellenes and the one in Libya. He sent messengers in different directions, some to Delphi, others to Abai of the Phocians, others to Dodona. Some were sent to the shrine of Amphiaraus and to that of Trophonius, and others to Branchidae in the land of Myotos. These were the oracles of the Hellenes to which Croesus sent messengers for divination. He also sent others to the shrine of Ammon in Libya to inquire there. He sent the messengers abroad in order to test the oracles and find out what knowledge they had, so that, if they were found to know the truth, he might send again and ask them whether he should attempt to march against the Persians. To the Lydians whom he sent to test the oracles, Croesus gave these instructions. From the day on which they set out from Sardis, they were to count the days that followed, and on the 100th day they were to consult the oracles, asking what Croesus son of Aliates, king of the Lydians, happened to be doing at that moment. Whatever each oracle prophesied, they were to have it written down and bring it back to him. What the other oracles prophesied is not reported by anyone. But at Delphi, as soon as the Lydians entered the sanctuary of the temple to consult the god and asked what they had been commanded to ask, the Pythian prophetess spoke these words in hexameter measure. I know the number of the sand and the measure of the drops in the ocean. I understand the dumb man, and I hear the speech of the speechless. There has come to my soul the smell of a strong-shelled tortoise boiling in a bronze cauldron, with the flesh of a lamb mixed with it. Bronze is laid beneath it, and bronze is wrapped around it. When the Pythian prophetess had uttered this oracle, the Lydians had the prophecy written down and immediately went away to Sardis. When the rest of those who had been sent around also arrived there with the answers of the oracles, Croesus unfolded the writings one by one and examined them. At first none of them pleased him, but when he heard the answer from Delphi, he at once worshipped the god and accepted the answer, judging that the oracle at Delphi was the only true one, because it had discovered what he himself had done. For when he sent his messengers to the several oracles to consult the gods, he kept the appointed day clearly in mind and contrived the following device. He thought of something impossible to discover or imagine, cut up a tortoise and a lamb, and boiled them together himself in a bronze cauldron, laying a bronze cover over them. This, then, was the answer given to Croesus from Delphi. As for the answer of Amphiaraus, I cannot say what he replied to the Lydians after they had performed the customary rites in his temple, for there is no record of this, any more than of the others, except only that Croesus thought that Amphiaraus, too, possessed a true oracle. After this, Croesus tried to win the favor of the god at Delphi with great sacrifices. Of all animals fit for sacrifice, he offered 3,000 of each kind. He heaped up couches overlaid with gold and with silver, golden cups, purple robes, and tunics, making a great pyre of them, and burned it, hoping by these means all the more to win the god over to the side of the Lydians. He also proclaimed to all the Lydians that each of them should sacrifice whatever he had. When he had finished the sacrifice, he melted down a vast quantity of gold and made half-plinths from it, each 6 palms long, 3 palms broad, and 1 palm high. Their number was 117. Of these 4 were of pure gold, each weighing 2.5 talents. The others were of gold alloyed with silver, each weighing 2 talents. He also had made an image of a lion of pure gold, weighing 10 talents. When the temple of Delphi was burned down, this lion fell from the half-plinths on which it had been set. It is now placed in the treasury of the Corinthians, weighing 6.5 talents, for 3.5 talents were melted away from it. When Croesus had finished all these things, he sent them to Delphi, and with them these gifts besides: 2 mixing bowls of great size, 1 gold and the other silver. The golden bowl was placed on the right hand as one entered the temple, and the silver bowl on the left, though their places too were changed after the temple was burned. The golden bowl is now in the treasury of the people of Clazomni, weighing 8.5 talents and 12 pounds besides. The silver bowl is placed in the corner of the vestibule and holds 600 amphors, being filled with wine by the Delphians at the feast of the Theophania. The people of Delphi say that this bowl is the work of Theodoros the Samian, and I think they are right, for it is clear to me that the workmanship is of no common kind. Croesus also set 4 silver wine jars, which stand in the treasury of the Corinthians, and 2 vessels for lustral water, 1 gold and the other silver. The gold one is inscribed from the Lacedaemonians, who say that it is their offering, but in this they do not speak correctly, for this too is from Croesus. One of the Delphians wrote the inscription on it, wishing to gratify the Lacedaemonians. I know his name, but I will not mention it. The boy through whose hand the water flows is from the Lacedaemonians, but neither of the lustral vessels is theirs. Along with these, Croesus sent many other votive offerings of no special distinction, including certain round castings of silver, and a golden figure of a woman 3 cubits high, which the Delphians say is a statue of Croesus Baker. Croesus also dedicated the ornaments from his wife's neck and her girdles. These were the things he sent to Delphi. To Amphiaraus, after hearing of his valor and his evil fate, Croesus dedicated a shield made entirely of gold throughout, and a spear all of solid gold, with the shaft also of gold as well as the 2 points. Both offerings remained even to my time at Thebes, in the temple of Ismenian Apollo. To the Lydians who were to carry these gifts to the temples, Croesus gave orders that they should ask the oracles this question also, whether Croesus should march against the Persians, and whether, if he did, he should join with himself any army of men as friends. When the Lydians arrived at the places to which they had been sent, and had dedicated the votive offerings, they inquired of the oracles, saying, Croesus, king of the Lydians and of other nations, considering that these are the only true oracles among men, presents to you gifts such as your revelations deserve, and now asks you again whether he should march against the Persians, and whether he should join with himself any army of men as allies. They inquired in this way, and the answers of both oracles agreed in one thing. They declared to Croesus that if he marched against the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. They also advised him to find out the most powerful of the Hellenes and join them to himself as friends. When the answers were brought back and Croesus heard them, he was delighted with the oracles. Expecting that he would certainly destroy the kingdom of Cyrus, he sent again to Pytho, and after learning the number of the men of Delphi, he presented each man with 2 gold staters. In return for this, the Delphians gave Croesus and the Lydians precedence in consulting the oracle, freedom from all payments, and the right to front seats at the games. They also gave them this privilege for all time. Any one of them who wished would be allowed to become a citizen of Delphi. After giving presents to the men of Delphi, Croesus consulted the oracle a 3rd time, for from the moment he learned the truth of the oracle, he made abundant use of it. In this consultation he asked whether his monarchy would endure for a long time. The Pythian prophetess answered him, When a mule of the Medes becomes monarch, then, delicate-footed Lydian, flayed by the pebbly Hermos, do not stay, and do not be ashamed to be called a coward. When these lines came to him, Croesus was more pleased by them than by all the rest. He supposed that a mule would never be ruler of the Medes instead of a man, and therefore that he himself and his heirs would never cease from ruling. After this, he turned his thought to finding out which people of the Hellenes he should consider the most powerful and gain over his friends. On inquiry, he found that the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians held the first places, the Lacedaemonians among the Dorian race, and the Athenians among the Ionian. These were the most eminent races in ancient time, the one being Pelasgian and the other Hellenic. The Pelasgian race never migrated from its place in any direction, while the Hellenic race was extremely given to wanderings. In the reign of Deucalion this race lived in Pisistratus. In the time of Doros, son of Hellen, it lived in the land below Ossa and Olympos, which is called Histories. When it was driven from Histories by the sons of Cadmos, it lived in Pindos, and was called Macmillan. From there it afterward moved to Dryopes, and from Dryopes it finally came to Peloponnesus and began to be called Dorian. What language the Pelasgians used to speak, I cannot say with certainty. But if one must judge from those Pelasgians who still remain, who lived in the city of Creston above the Teassenians, and who were once neighbors of the race now called Dorian, living then in the land now called Thessaliotes, and also from those Pelasgians who remain at Placia and Skylake in the region of the Hellespont, who before that had been settlers with the Athenians, and from the natives of various other towns that are truly Pelasgian, though they have lost the name then, if one must judge from these, the Pelasgians used to speak a barbarian language. If all the Pelasgian race was like these, then the Attic race, being Pelasgian, unlearned its language at the same time that it changed and became Hellenic. The people of Creston do not speak the same language as any of those who live around them, nor do the people of Phakia, but the two speak the same language as one another. This proves that they still keep unchanged the form of language they brought with them when they migrated to those places. As for the Hellenic race, I clearly perceive that it has always used the same language since it first arose. But when it first separated from the Pelasgian race, it was weak. Starting from a small beginning, it increased to the great number of races we now see, chiefly because many barbarian races were added to it besides. Moreover, I think it is also true of the Pelasgian race that, so long as it remained barbarian, it never made any great increase. Croesus was informed that, of these races, the Athenian people were held subject and torn by faction under Pisistratus, son of Hippocrates, who at that time was despot of the Athenians. A great marvel had happened to Hippocrates when, as a private citizen, he went to view the Olympic Games. After he had offered sacrifice, the cauldrons standing on the hearth, full of pieces of flesh and water, boiled over without any fire beneath them. Chelon the Lacedaemonian, who happened to be present and saw the marvel, advised Hippocrates first not to bring into his house a wife who might bear him children, second, if he already had one, to dismiss her, and third, if he happened to have a son, to disown him. When Chelon gave this advice, Hippocrates, they say, was unwilling to be persuaded. So afterward this Pisistratus was born to him. At a time when the Athenians of the shore were at feud with those of the plain, with Megacles son of Alcmaeon as leader of the first faction and Lycurgus son of Aristolides as leader of the faction of the plain, Pisistratus aimed at the despotism for himself and gathered a third party. After collecting supporters, and calling himself leader of the men of the mountainlands, he contrived the following device. He wounded himself and his mules, then drove his chariot into the marketplace as if he had just escaped from his enemies, who, he alleged, had tried to kill him while he was driving into the country. He asked the commons to grant him some protection, for before this he had gained a reputation in his command against the Megarians, during which he took Nicaea and performed other notable service. The commons of the Athenians were deceived and gave him men chosen from the city, wellers. These became not Pisistratus' spearmen, but his clubmen, for they followed behind him carrying wooden clubs. These men rose with Pisistratus and seized the Acropolis. Then Pisistratus ruled the Athenians, without disturbing the existing magistrates or changing the ancient laws. He administered the state under the constitution already established, ordering it fairly and well. Not long afterward, however, the followers of Megacles and those of Lycurgus joined together and drove him out. In this way Pisistratus had gained possession of Athens for the first time, and in this way he lost power before it had taken firm root. Those who had driven Pisistratus out later fell into factional quarrels with one another again. Megacles, harassed by the party strife, sent a message to Pisistratus asking whether he was willing to marry his daughter on condition that he become despot. Pisistratus accepted the proposal and made an agreement on these terms. Then, with a view to his return, they contrived what I think was by far the simplest device ever practiced, especially considering that it was devised at a time when the Hellenic race had long been distinguished from the barbarian as more skillful and further removed from foolish simplicity, and among the Athenians, who are counted first among the Hellenes in ability. In the deme of Paeania, there was a woman named Phia, nearly 4 cubits tall, lacking only 3 fingers, and also fair in form. They dressed this woman in full armor, had her mount a chariot, showed her the bearing by which she might best suit the part, and then drove toward the city. They sent heralds running ahead, and when these arrived in the city they spoke the words commanded to them. O Athenians, receive Pisistratus with favor. Athene herself, honoring him most of all men, is bringing him back to her Acropolis. So the heralds went about here and there saying this. Immediately a report spread through the country deems that Athene was bringing Pisistratus back, while the people in the city, persuaded that the woman was the goddess herself, worshipped the human creature and received Pisistratus. Having recovered the despotism in the way just described, Pisistratus married the daughter of Megacles according to the agreement made with him. But since Pisistratus already had sons who were young men, and since the descendants of Alcmaeon were said to be under a curse, he did not want children to be born to him from his newly married wife, and so he had intercourse with her not in the accustomed manner. At first the woman kept the secret, but afterward she told her mother, whether in answer to a question or not I cannot say, and her mother told her husband Megacles. Megacles was very indignant that he should be dishonored by Pisistratus, and in his anger he immediately set about composing his quarrel with the men of his faction. When Pisistratus heard what was being done against him, he left the land entirely and came to Eretria, where he took counsel with his sons. The advice of Hippias prevailed, namely that they should try to win back the despotism. They began gathering gifts of money from the states that owed them obligations for favors received. Many contributed large sums, but the Thebans surpassed the rest in giving money. Then, to make the story brief, time passed, and at last everything was ready for their return. Certain Argives came from the Peloponnesus as mercenaries, and a man of Naxos named Lygdamis had come to them of his own accord and showed very great zeal in providing both money and men. Starting from Eretria after 10 years had passed, they returned. In Attica the first place they took possession of was Marathon. While they were encamped there, their partisans from the city came to them, and others also flowed in from the various demes, men to whom despotic rule was more welcome than freedom. These were gathering together. The Athenians in the city, both while Pisistratus was collecting the money and afterward when he took possession of Marathon, paid no attention. But when they heard that he was marching from Marathon toward the city, they went out to the rescue against him. The Athenians marched in full force to fight the returning exiles. The forces of Pisistratus, moving from Marathon toward the city, met them when they had just come to the temple of Athene Palanes, and there they encamped opposite them. Then, moved by divine guidance, Amphilitos the Acarnanian, a soothsayer, came into the presence of Pisistratus. Approaching him, he uttered an oracle in hexameter verse. Now the cast has been made and the net has been spread wide. In the night the tunnies will dart through the moonlit waters. He uttered this oracle to Pisistratus under divine inspiration. Pisistratus understood the oracle, said that he accepted the prophecy that had been spoken, and led his army against the enemy. The Athenians from the city were just then occupied with their morning meal, and some of them, after eating, with games of dice or with sleep. The forces of Pisistratus fell upon the Athenians and put them to flight. As they fled, Pisistratus devised a very skillful plan so that the Athenians would not gather again into one body, but would remain scattered. He mounted his sons on horseback and sent them ahead. Overtaking the fugitives, they spoke the words Pisistratus had commanded them, telling the men to be of good cheer and each to go away to his own home. The Athenians did this, and so Pisistratus for the 3rd time gained possession of Athens. He firmly rooted his despotism with many foreign mercenaries, and with much revenue of money, coming partly from the land itself and partly from around the river Strymon. He also took as hostages the sons of those Athenians who had remained in the land and had not at once fled, and placed them in the hands of Naxos, for Pisistratus had conquered this place also by war and handed it over to the charge of Leudamus. Besides this, in obedience to the oracles, he cleansed the island of Delos. His cleansing was of this kind. As far as the view from the temple extended, he dug up all the dead bodies buried in that area and removed them to another part of Delos. Thus Pisistratus was despot of the Athenians. Of the Athenians, some had fallen in the battle, and others, together with the sons of Alcmaeon, were exiles from their native land. Such was the condition that Croesus heard was prevailing among the Athenians at this time. As for the Lacedaemonians, he heard that they had escaped from great evils, and had now gained the upper hand over the Tegeans in war. When Leon and Hegesippus were kings of Sparta, the Lacedaemonians, who had good success in all their other wars, suffered disaster only in the war they waged against the men of Tegea. Moreover, in the times before this they had almost the worst laws of all the Hellenes, both in matters concerning themselves alone, and in their having no dealings with strangers. They changed to a good constitution of laws in this way. Lycurgus, a Spartan man held in high repute, came to the oracle at Delphi. As he entered the sanctuary of the temple, the Pythian prophetess immediately said, "You have come, O Lycurgus, to this rich shrine of my temple, loved by Zeus and by all who possess the homes of Olympos. Whether to call you a god I doubt in my prophetic voices, god or man, but rather a god I think, O Lycurgus." Some say, in addition to this, that the Pythian prophetess also set forth for him the order of things now established for the Spartans. But the Lacedaemonians themselves say that Lycurgus, after becoming guardian of Leobotes, his brother's son and king of the Spartans, brought these things from Crete. As soon as he became guardian, he changed all the prevailing laws, and took measures to ensure that they would not transgress his institutions. After this Lycurgus established what belonged to war, the Enomoties, the Tricads, and the common meals, and in addition to these the Ephors and the Senate. Having changed in this way, the Spartans had good laws. After Lycurgus died, they erected a temple to him and paid him great worship. As one might suppose, with fertile land, and no small number of men living in it, they immediately shot up and became prosperous. It was no longer enough for them to keep still. Presuming that they were superior in strength to the Arcadians, they consulted the oracle at Delphi about conquering the whole of Arcadia. The Pythian prophetess answered, "You ask me for the land of Arcadia. You ask much. I refuse it. There are many men in Arcadian land, stout men who eat acorns, and they will prevent you from this. But I do not grudge you everything. I will give you Tegea to dance in, beaten with sounding feet, and a fair plain to measure with line and divide." When the Lacedaemonians heard this report, they held back from the other Arcadians and marched against the Tegeans with fetters in their hands, trusting in a deceitful oracle and expecting that they would make slaves of the men of Tegea. But after they were defeated in the encounter, those of them who were taken alive worked while wearing the very fetters they had brought with them, and so measured with line and divided the plain of the Tegeans. These fetters with which they had been bound were preserved even to my own time at Tegea, hanging around the temple of Athena. In the earlier war, as I have said, the Lacedaemonians struggled continually against the Tegeans without success. But in the time of Croesus, during the reign of Anaxandrides and Ariston at Lacedaemon, the Spartans at last became victors in the war. They became so in the following way. Since they were always being defeated in the war by the men of Tegea, they sent messengers to consult the oracle at Delphi and asked what god they should propitiate in order to get the better of the Tegeans in war. The Pythian prophetess answered that they should bring into their own land the bones of Orestes, son of Agamemnon. When they were unable to find the grave of Orestes, they sent men again to the god to ask about the place where Orestes was laid. When the messengers asked this, the prophetess said, "There is a Tegea in the Arcadian land, founded in a smooth place. Their two winds blow together under strong compulsion. There is stroke and stroke in return, and trouble laid upon trouble. There the son of Agamemnon lies in the life-giving earth. If you bring him home with you, you shall be master of Tegea." When the Lacedaemonians heard this, they were still no closer to discovering the grave, though they searched everywhere, until Lichas, one of the Spartans called well-doers, found it. The well-doers are the eldest citizens who are passing out from the ranks of the horsemen, 5 each year. During the year in which they pass out from the horsemen, they are required to let themselves be sent without ceasing to various places by the Spartan state. Lichas, being one of these men, discovered the grave in Tegea by both fortune and ability. Since there were dealings under truce at that time with the men of Tegea, he had come to a forge there and was watching iron being worked. He was amazed as he watched what was being done. The smith, noticing his wonder, stopped working and spoke to him. "Surely, stranger of Lacedaemon, if you had seen what I once saw, you would have marveled much, since even now you marvel so greatly at the working of this iron. I wanted to make a well in this enclosure, and while digging I came upon a coffin 7 cubits long. Not believing that there had ever been men larger than those of the present day, I opened it and saw that the dead body was equal in length to the coffin. Then after measuring it, I filled the earth over it again." So the smith told him what he had seen. Lichas thought over what had been said and conjectured that this was Orestes, according to the saying of the oracle. He formed his conjecture in this way. Seeing that the smith had 2 pairs of bellows, he concluded that these were the winds spoken of. The anvil and the hammer were the stroke, and the stroke in return, and the iron being worked was the trouble laid upon trouble, comparing it in thought to the fact that iron has been discovered for the harm of mankind. Having made this conjecture, he returned to Sparta and reported the whole matter to the Lacedaemonians. They brought a charge against him on a fictitious pretext and drove him into exile. So he came to Tegea, told the smith of his misfortune, and tried to hire the enclosure from him. At first the smith would not let him have it, but at last Lichas persuaded him and took up his residence there. He dug up the grave, gathered the bones together, and went away with them to Sparta. From that time onward, whenever the Spartans and Tegeans tried their strength against one another, the Lacedaemonians had much the advantage in the war, and by now they had subdued to themselves the greater part of Peloponnesus besides. When Croesus was informed of all these things, he sent messengers to Sparta with gifts in their hands to ask for an alliance, having commanded them what they should say. When they arrived, they spoke as follows. Croesus, king of the Lydians and also of other nations, sent us here and says this: O Lacedaemonians, since the god by an oracle commanded me to join the Hellene to myself as a friend, and since I am informed that you are the chiefs of Hellas, I invite you according to the oracle, desiring to be your friend and your ally, apart from all guile and deceit. Thus Croesus made his announcement to the Lacedaemonians through his messengers. The Lacedaemonians, who had themselves also heard of the oracle given to Croesus, were pleased at the arrival of the Lydians and exchanged oaths of friendship and alliance. They were also already bound to Croesus by services he had rendered them before this time. The Lacedaemonians had once sent to Sardis, and were buying gold there for the purpose of using it on the image of Apollo that is now set up on Mount Thornax in the Lacedaemonian land, and when they wished to buy it, Croesus gave it to them as a gift. For this reason, then, the Lacedaemonians accepted the alliance, and also because Croesus had chosen them as his friends in preference to all the other Hellenes. The Lacedaemonians were not only ready themselves when Croesus made his offer, they also had a bronze mixing bowl made, covered on the outside with figures around the rim and large enough to hold 300 amphors. They sent this away, wishing to give it to Croesus as a gift in return. This bowl never came to Sardis, and 2 accounts are given for why. The Lacedaemonians say that when the bowl was on its way to Sardis and had come opposite the land of Samos, the men of Samos heard of it, sailed out with ships of war, and took it away. But the Samians themselves say that the Lacedaemonians who were carrying the bowl, finding that they were too late and hearing that Sardis had been taken and Croesus was a prisoner, sold the bowl in Samos. Certain private persons bought it and dedicated it as a votive offering in the temple of Hera. Probably those who had sold it said, when they returned to Sparta, that it had been taken from them by the Samians.
And we will halt there, with the alliances made, the army gathering, and that famous oracle ringing in Croesus's ears that if he crossed the Halys he would destroy a great empire. He never does ask who's asterisk. Next time, in part 3, he crosses the river and finds out. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.